It was the kind of night that caught you by surprise, the kind that changed everything. We were sitting on the worn-out couch in my tiny apartment, the walls dotted with memories, photographs, old tickets, our favorite books stacked in random corners. The air was thick with that comfortable silence only best friends share. You know, the one when words aren't necessary and just being in each other's presence feels like home. We'd had a few too many drinks, laughing at inside jokes that no one else would understand when something shifted in the room. It wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic. It was just a quiet, almost imperceptible moment, like a breath being held too long. I didn't realize it at first, not until you turned to me, your eyes suddenly serious, too serious for a moment like this. And in that silence, when everything in the room seemed to stop, you asked the question that shattered everything. What would happen if we kissed? I don't know why those words hit me the way they did. Maybe it was the way you said them, like you had been carrying that thought around for longer than either of us had ever realized. Maybe it was the way my heart skipped a beat and then raced to catch up. But the truth is, I was caught off guard. Our friendship, so solid and steadfast, had never been anything more than that, friendship. I never imagined a day where it would be anything else. Yet there you were, your gaze intense, waiting for me to answer. The silence stretched on longer than I could handle, the tension so thick it felt like it could snap at any second. You knew me too well, knew that I couldn't hide my emotions from you. But what you didn't know, what I couldn't tell you, was that the thought had crossed my mind just once fleetingly. It was a thought I pushed away, terrified of what it might mean, what it might do to us. Our friendship had always been the one constant in my life, something that could never be compromised, not by any feeling, not by any risk. But now, as you sat there, waiting for an answer that I wasn't sure I had, everything I had ever believed about us was suddenly in question. Did I want to kiss you? My mind screamed no, that would ruin everything, but my heart betrayed me in that moment. It pounded in my chest, too loud to ignore. The thing is, I had never thought of you as anything other than my best friend. But now I could feel the shift, the magnetism between us drawing us closer, and all I could do was sit there frozen, unsure of how to respond. What did I even want? What was I supposed to want? And why did this feel like it was about to change everything, the very foundation of who we were? I didn't answer immediately. I couldn't. My mind was running a mile a minute, chasing fragments of thoughts, none of which made any sense. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I could see you waiting for me, the tension in your posture as clear as day. But you didn't push. You didn't demand an answer. And for the first time in our friendship, that unspoken understanding between us, the one that had always allowed us to communicate without words, began to feel like a delicate thread about to snap. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice, but nothing came. My brain screamed at me to tell you how absurd the idea was, that it would destroy what we had. But the part of me that was terrified of losing you to something as messy as this, something as unpredictable as love, held me silent. I glanced at you then, really looked at you for the first time that night. Your eyes weren't just curious anymore. They were vulnerable, almost pleading. That was the moment when it hit me. Maybe you had felt this way all along. Maybe for months or even years, you had been waiting for me to see you differently. And maybe, just maybe, you'd been hoping I'd say yes to that kiss. I couldn't help but wonder when the shift had happened, when this line between friends and something more had begun to blur. We'd always been there for each other, through heartbreaks, bad decisions, and those quiet moments of vulnerability that only best friends can share. But in this moment, I realized we'd crossed a line I hadn't been aware of, a line that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. And then, in a heartbeat, you leaned in, just a little, as if testing the waters, as if you were waiting for me to pull back, and I almost did. But something inside me stopped me, a feeling I couldn't quite explain. You were so close now, and I could smell the faint scent of your cologne, feel the warmth of your breath against my skin, and I realized that, despite the whirlwind of confusion, I wasn't pulling away. In fact, I was leaning in too. And that scared me. Because I knew that one simple, unplanned kiss could unravel everything I thought I understood about us, about what we were. But it was too late. I had already leaned too far in, and before I could stop myself, our lips met. The kiss was gentle, unsure, as though neither of us wanted to break the fragile bubble of that moment. But when your hand found the back of my neck, pulling me closer, something inside me shifted. That soft touch sparked a fire I had been keeping buried for far too long. And suddenly, the world outside our tiny bubble didn't matter anymore. It was just you and me. The kiss lasted longer than I had expected, but it wasn't perfect, far from it. There was hesitation, there were questions, but there was also this undeniable truth in the way we fit together. But then, just as quickly as it had begun, you pulled away. Your eyes were wide, searching my face, looking for some kind of answer. And for the first time in my life, I had no words. The silence between us was deafening, suffocating even. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, louder than my thoughts, louder than the rush of blood in my face. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? You looked at me like I had just handed you the universe, like I had given you the key to some door neither of us had ever expected to open. But I was still reeling, still caught in the confusion of it all. I wanted to tell you that it didn't mean anything, that it was a mistake, but the truth was, it did mean something. It meant everything. I could see it in your eyes, in the way you were waiting for me to make sense of it, to give us some direction. But I had nothing, and that terrified me. You reached for my hand, and I couldn't pull away. It felt too natural, too right, even though everything about this was wrong. Your thumb traced the lines of my palm in that familiar, comforting way we'd always done, except now, it felt charged. I could feel the shift, like the ground beneath us was trembling, as if we were standing on the edge of something neither of us had anticipated. My mind screamed for clarity, but my heart told me to stay. And so I did. We stayed there, holding hands, trying to make sense of the tangled mess of emotions. But with each passing second, the world outside us faded further away. Nothing else mattered except the two of us in that moment. Then you broke the silence, your voice barely above a whisper. "Did you feel it?" you asked, your eyes searching mine. I was silent for a long time, trying to find the words that could explain this indescribable pull, this need I hadn't known existed. What I felt wasn't a simple attraction, it was something deeper, something rooted in the foundation of everything we had been. It was raw and terrifying. The worst part? It felt right. I should have been running, should have been terrified of what it meant to cross this line, but instead, I felt the stirrings of something new and impossible to ignore. You saw it in my face before I could even answer, that same understanding flashing across your features. You knew. You knew that what had just happened between us wasn't a fleeting mistake. It was a moment that would change us forever. But then you looked away, breaking the eye contact that had held us together for so long. It was as if the weight of what had just happened settled in on you all at once. You pulled your hand back slowly, as if trying to erase the touch that had lingered too long. The tension that had been so electric just moments ago now felt suffocating. "I don't know what this means," you said, your voice thick with uncertainty, and neither did I. But the question was no longer about what it meant. It was about what we would do with it with us. There was no going back. The thought of pretending that nothing had changed was impossible now. We both knew it. We both knew that the friendship we had spent years building was teetering on the edge of something neither of us had planned for. And deep down, we both feared that we were about to lose it all. But as I looked at you, I realized that I didn't know how to live in a world where you weren't at the center of it. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be truly afraid of losing someone. Not just as a friend, but as something far more. The days after that night were a blur of confusion, avoidance, and quiet desperation. We didn't speak about what had happened, not directly. Instead, we slipped back into our old routines, as though the kiss had been nothing more than a fleeting moment of misplaced affection. But I could feel the weight between us, an unspoken tension that neither of us could escape. It was like walking around with a heavy secret we both knew but refused to acknowledge. I caught myself staring at you sometimes, seeing you as something different, something I wasn't sure I could handle. And then there were the moments when our hands brushed by accident, or when I'd see you looking at me just a little too long, and I'd be flooded with that same feeling, the undeniable connection that was no longer just a friendship. I hated that we couldn't talk about it, but I hated even more that I was afraid to. I wanted to tell you everything, to spill out all the jumbled emotions I was keeping hidden in the pit of my stomach. I wanted to tell you that I didn't know how to live without you, but that the thought of risking everything scared me more than anything ever had. I wanted to say that I loved you, but those words felt too big, too real. So instead, I said nothing. And the silence between us grew louder, more oppressive. The moments we shared, the ones we used to be able to laugh through, talk through, even fight through, felt awkward now. Conversations became riddled with pauses, with forced jokes and fake smiles. We were falling apart, not because we wanted to, but because neither of us knew how to bridge the gap between what we had been and what we were now. It was a Sunday when it finally came to a head. We were sitting in the park like we had so many times before, watching the world move around us. You had been quiet for a while, your usual energy replaced with a heaviness I couldn't ignore. I was trying to keep my distance, pretending I didn't feel the tug at my chest every time I looked at you. But then, out of nowhere, you turned to me and asked, "Do you think we're ruining everything?" Your voice was small, fragile, like you were holding your breath, waiting for my response. I didn't know how to answer that. I didn't know if I was ruining us, if we were ruining us. The truth was, I had never felt so unsure of anything in my life. "I don't know," I whispered back, my voice shaky. "I don't want to lose you." For the first time in days, we sat in that silence without the weight of uncertainty hanging over us. We were two people who had loved each other for so long in one way, and now were fumbling through the unknown territory of a love that was entirely new but just as real. I could feel your hand reach for mine, just as it had that night, a tentative, careful gesture. And for a split second, I almost pulled away. But I didn't. I let you take my hand, and in that moment, I realized that whatever happened next, whether we fell, or we soared, or we stumbled and broke, it was better than living in fear of what we might lose. Because for the first time in my life, I realized I was already losing you, not because of the love we might have, but because of the love we refused to acknowledge. The kiss, the touch, the connection, it wasn't the problem. The problem was pretending that none of it was real. And that was the turning point. The moment when everything I had been avoiding hit me full force. I wasn't just afraid of what would happen if we took that leap. I was afraid of what would happen if we didn't. Because deep down, I knew we were no longer just best friends. We were something more. And the only way out of that was to face it head on, no matter how terrifying it was. We couldn't keep dancing around it. I couldn't keep pretending that my heart wasn't already fully invested in something I couldn't undo. Something that had been building for years. Something that was so much more than a kiss. Something that was never just friendship. And it was in that moment, as I held your hand, that I realized I was ready to find out what came next, no matter how messy, no matter how complicated, no matter how wild it might be. Because it was time to step out of the shadows of our past and into the light of something real, something undeniable. And whatever that was, I knew I couldn't let it go. Not now. Not ever. The decision came in a rush of clarity, a moment so vivid that it felt like the world had finally paused to let us breathe. We spent the next few weeks navigating the new version of our relationship. Cautiously at first, but with each passing day, it became easier to fall into this space that was once so foreign to us. The tension that had suffocated us was replaced with something else, something lighter, something freer. We stopped pretending that we weren't feeling it, that the sparks weren't there. We allowed ourselves to explore this new territory, taking one step forward and sometimes two steps back, but always together. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when the weight of what we were doing threatened to overwhelm us. But every time that happened, we leaned on each other, just like we always had. And somehow, we started to rebuild piece by piece, a new foundation, one that felt even stronger than before. But the thing about love, real love, is that it's never clean. It's messy, it's unpredictable, and it forces you to confront everything you've been hiding from. And there were moments when I questioned whether we were making a mistake, whether this change between us was something that could survive outside the bubble we had created. Would we be able to live in a world where we were no longer just best friends, where everyone around us could see the shift? The thought terrified me, but then I'd look at you, and I would remember why we were doing this, not for some idealized version of love, but because we had already been through the hardest parts together. We had survived heartbreaks, long nights of confessions, and deep conversations that left us raw. We knew each other in ways that no one else did, and that was something worth fighting for. The real test came one evening when we were walking home from a late-night dinner, the city lights casting a soft glow over everything. We were talking, but I could tell something was different in the way you were looking at me. That same spark was there, but now it was accompanied by something deeper, something more uncertain. You stopped in your tracks and turned to face me, your eyes searching mine as if looking for answers. And in that moment, I realized how far we had come, how far we had fallen. You took a deep breath, your voice barely above a whisper. "What if we're not ready for this?" you asked. "What if this? What if we aren't enough?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut. For all the steps we had taken, for all the times we had allowed ourselves to feel this new thing, there was still fear, fear of failure, fear of change. But I saw it in your eyes, the same fear I felt every day. And in that moment, I knew that the only answer was to choose each other, to choose this messy, imperfect, beautiful love we had built from the ground up. "We're ready," I whispered back, my hand reaching for yours, pulling you closer. "We've been ready all along." And as we stood there, wrapped in the quiet of that night, the truth hit me in a way it never had before. Love isn't about waiting for the perfect moment or the right circumstances. It's about choosing to step forward into the unknown together. There were still questions, still fears, but I didn't need all the answers anymore. Because in that moment it became clear we were no longer best friends. We were something more, and that something was worth everything. All the uncertainty, all the risks, all the moments of doubt, they were all worth it. We had created something real, something lasting, something that would survive whatever came our way. And just like that, everything shifted again. Only this time, it wasn't a moment of fear or hesitation. It was a moment of absolute certainty. The kiss that had started it all wasn't the end. It was just the beginning.